We have Patricia Pablo with Pascoyaki Tribe.
With the Tohono Nation.
Oh, I'm sorry, Patricia. Sorry about that. And Fausto Burrell with Town of Marana. And we have Barbara Escobar with DEQ. Mark Novak with the University of Arizona. Let's see. Oh, Romero Truly. And staff. Staff wants to. And Thomas Garcia on Saurita. And Jason Boston, Bahi, Pascoyaki Tribe.
So I know we have
Mark Hoffman from ADOT Planning.
Oh, sorry,
Oh.
Mark.
Thanks. Is there anybody else online we missed? It's hard to navigate the full screen over here. Okay, well then we'll move on to the in-kind reporting. Jeanette?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and send around the in-kind sheet that you guys are familiar with. Please make sure you document any time that you've spent on this meeting and reviewing the materials for this meeting. Our planning efforts are enhanced by recording all of our donated time. So if you have any questions about that, staff will document the folks that are on Zoom call. And if you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know.
Okay. While that goes around the table, we'll move on to item 3, the approval of the August 17th meeting summary. Has everybody had a chance to review it?
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve it?
So moved.
Jose moved,
Second.
Robin second. Any comments? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed,
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Perfect. All those opposed say nay. And it passes. Move on to item 4, which is the update on the Regional Transportation Alternatives Grants, the RTAG competitive selection process. Jamie Brown.
Morning, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on the Regional Transportation Alternatives Grants competitive selection process. Next slide, please. In terms of an overview of the process and the call for projects, the call for projects was issued on May 3rd. For those not familiar with the program, the Transportation Alternatives Program is a set aside of the Federal Surface Transportation Fund program. For the call for projects, eligible projects must meet requirements for both the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program, as well as the Regional Transportation Authority or RTA Category 41, greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalks. Also, the required non-federal match, which is 5.7% of the project total cost, is to be covered by the RTA. Next slide, please. For the federal requirements for the Transportation Alternatives Program, a competitive selection process must be used. PAG served as the grant administrator and convened a panel of agency representatives not submit any projects for this competitive grant. 3-member panel representing a range of professions reviewed the applications, listened to project presentations, scored projects, and agreed on recommended amounts for programming and PAG. Given the federal requirement for a competitive selection process to be used for the Transportation Alternatives Program, the decision of the selection panel is final. Next slide, please. We're pleased to share the results of the selection panel's recommendation, their decision on this slide with their funding award. The listed here, the order of these is just by when we received the applications. On the left, the project sponsor, followed by the project name, then the amount of RTAG funding awarded, and finally the non-federal RTA match. And so you can see that 5 projects were awarded funds. Next slide, please. Wanted to share some maps of the locations of these projects. These were developed by technical services staff, so they're not official maps, but just to provide a location. Starting with the town of Sahuarita's project, this multi-use path on Pima Mayan Road from Rancho Sahuarita Boulevard to the Desert Diamond Casino and Delivery Access Road. Slide please. For the town of Oro Valley, this is the Naranja Drive multi-use path from La Cañada to First. Next slide, please. Pima County's Palo Verde Sidewalks project from approximately the TDC South Interceptor Canal to Gas Road. Slide, please. City of Tucson Samara Avenue Bike Boulevard project from Golf Links Road to the Loop. Next slide, please. And finally, City of Tucson Copper Flower Street Bike Boulevard project from Fairview Avenue to just east. Next slide, please. So the next steps are to coordinate with applicants to identify project readiness for the federal funds, develop IGAs for RT board approval, and with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Are there any questions from the committee? Well, I have questions. What was the prioritization metric used for this?
So what criteria did we
Yeah,
use?
what criteria did you use to prioritize the 5 that were awarded funding?
So the scoring criteria included, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The scoring criteria included cost per mile, miles to be delivered, so that's the project length, project readiness, regional significance and benefit, ability to address network gaps, anticipated safety benefits, level of community involvement and support for development planning of this project, and then bonus points were awarded for projects within or adjacent to high need areas.
Can you break down a little bit the weighting of those criteria that you mentioned? And what kind of bonus points that were awarded?
Bonus points, thank you, Madam Chair, members. 5 bonus points were awarded, so a total of 100 points were possible, so additional 5 points could be added on top. Those were for projects that were within or adjacent to traffic analysis zones, within or adjacent to the traffic analysis zones.
Okay, in the application in the RTAG call for projects, the NOFA, you don't mention that the highest weighted criteria is going to be the number of miles that are provided with this facility. I'm just curious from my partners, the other jurisdictions, is that information that in conversations you understood was going to be kind of the most important factor?
Not that I'm aware of, Madam Chair. But it sounds to me, from what I'm seeing, is that most of the projects that were submitted did get approved, except for 5 that were not eligible. Is that correct? How many projects were, excuse me, how many projects were submitted, and out of the number of projects that were submitted, how many of them got approved?
Members of the Mr. Rodriguez, there were 10 applications. 5 were deemed eligible. And 4 were, the recommendation of the selection panel was to fully fund as many projects as possible. 4 were fully funded. And
So the 5 that didn't meet the criteria, can you describe what those applications were for?
So there was a application for BIPOC and HAWK crossings, which are not RT approved and eligible. Safe routes to schools. It's not RT approved. Bike share. There are 2 bike share applications. They're not RT approved.
So the Safe Routes to School, was that a encouragement and education program rather than infrastructure? Well, I just want to say, I'm really disappointed. Just Jose, you kind of brought it up. Yes, 5 that were deemed eligible received funding. The county was the only agency that was told to reduce the scope of our project. There was insufficient funding. And just some background on the project we submitted. It came about from a regional safety audit that was funded by PAG due to a high need area along Palo Verde. There's right now about 20,000 vehicles a day that use that route. There's nearly 300 pedestrians a day that use the bus transit stops that are along there. The Gospel Rescue Mission, as well as La Frontera Center for Hope, are located on that corridor. At this time, there are no sidewalks for that corridor, and this is a population that is dependent on transit, walking, cycling. So very high need area, very high priority. We've been looking for funding opportunities for this project for some time. We've leveraged FTA funding to improve the bus stops so that they are ADA accessible. Right now, the route to those from the Gospel Rescue Mission is not ADA accessible. So I feel that the call for projects was not very clear in terms of the high level prioritization to hit the mark in terms of some performance, number of miles that you're looking for from RTA. I don't know where we are in terms of hitting that mark overall for performance in that category. I just really disappointed that we can't pull together a project. We're going after HSIP funding to do the Hawk that is needed in this area, but we're having to severely reduce the limits of the sidewalks because our project was cut nearly in half in order to fully fund the other 4 projects that were eligible. And that was information that was not shared by PAG staff when they had a one-on-one meeting with us, which I thought was a little disingenuous.
I would like to request just a tabulation for this thing.
And not just how many points each got, but in what categories, so we can be clearer about how our projects fared and why. I think that would
That would be
probably
really
helpful because it would help us not to do more applications than needed, I think is sort of the bottom line. And I think it aids a little bit in transparency for what these are meant to cover.
Yeah, and part of the guidance from FHWA for the transportation alternatives, which has been branded as RTAG for this region, and its guidance from March 30th of this year, was that a competitive process should allow project sponsors to understand the project selection evaluation criteria and how projects will be evaluated. So that is not information that was shared with this group that put together applications prior to the selection.
Madam Chair, perhaps I didn't hear it correctly, but did I hear that Pima County was the only of the awarded projects was the only one that had a scope requested to be reduced?
Correct.
And what was the reason for the reduction and why only Pima County was requested to have their scope reduced?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. If I may first address Ms. Rain's request that we can post the scores. Your question, why was Pima County the only one that had reduced scope requested? Why was it this? Based on the selection panel scoring, the scoring worksheet, which if you just look at the scores, they had the lowest score. And so also the recommendation of this selection panel was to fully fund as many of the projects as possible. So with the funding available, 4 of the 5 projects could be fully funded.
Okay, so it was the only one because it scored number 5. Thank you.
Can you share who was on that selection panel?
Well, we can share that representatives of the town of Marana, Tucson Airport Authority, and on that selection.
And when you produce the spreadsheet that shares the scores, I would ask that be made public as a part of the meeting documents for this.
Do I have another question, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I keep running through my head the process of the lowest scoring project be the one that has to reduce the scope. And I understand that, I guess, is it a guideline or a policy that shall fund the projects 100% as much as you can? I guess what I'm trying to determine is, you have so much money in the pot. Why wasn't that difference or that shortfall spread equally among the projects, either proportionally or whatever, rather than just to one project? Is there a policy or a guideline that stipulates that? Was that a decision that was made by the panel?
So as far as we know, looking at the US code and the guidance rules, there's no prescriptive method for how competitive selection panel did try to recruited members. We wanted to make sure that we were not recruiting anybody who is applying. So we want to make sure there's no conflict of interest. In terms of that policy to fully fund all the projects, as many projects as possible, that there's no policy panel. Discussed as the written selection panel.
Modified, or that decision can be modified to distribute equally or more equally that shortfall than to just place the burden on one agency.
Explain. The decision of the selection panel is final for this round. And this is something that when we start to talk about the scoring, it's really not the place of the transportation planning committee to start to influence the scores of this project that is already processes that has already been completed. Otherwise, it's seen as influencing. We're happy to meet one-on-one with anyone, applicants, to discuss the process in more detail and also to receive feedback on changes for the next. So I think in terms of could that be done? Yes. But should that be done for this process? I would say that that decision is fine.
Is there an action relative to this for this committee? Are we supposed to approve this?
There's no action for it.
This is strictly educational.
Correct.
Thank you.
I have one other question that came to mind. I know that this is federal funding and two of the agencies that are getting funding don't have their CA. So I'm just curious, have you already partnered with ADOT? And was the cost estimate put together for these? Did it take into consideration that it's a federal project rather than a locally funded project?
I can speak. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Start first.
No, go ahead. I'll finish it.
If I may, to Jose, Representative Thomas, I'll read it on city agencies. So in a couple of projects, we hope that we were clear that any awarded sponsors would not seek projects. So I think that's important to bear in mind. So regardless of how these budgets were developed, that is stated very clearly in all the projects that we would issue.
Well, as far as like the federal process, yes, we are familiar with the federal process, and I'm also aware that we're not. We look into being self-certified, and we soon realize it's not viable for the town of Oro Valley, because unless you're going to have 3 or 4 federalized projects in 1 year, then it would be a viable option. So we did look into it. We're familiar with the process, the environmental impacts, the on-the-job training, the Davis Bay. Yeah, we are familiar with all. We also know that when you federalize projects, it's going to cost a lot of money. We've done projects in the past. It's not my preference because of all the conditions that are involved. The other reason why we're not really, at least me, my personal, I don't like federal projects because I can't oversee the project. I'm not self-certified. So we have the staff qualified. We have engineers, we have inspectors that are all got all the certification. What we don't have is certification. So we do what we've done in the past. We'll look towards ADOT. We'll do an IGA with the LPA. And it makes it a lot easier because it's like turnkey. It's like the Arrow funds. They do everything for us. I would like to oversee the design. I would like to oversee the construction. We've done big multi-million-dollar projects. ADOT work with us. I mean, Rod worked with us doing big projects. So we get the capabilities. We just don't have the self-certification. And then as far as I know, there's only like 8 municipalities in the state of Arizona that have certification. But for us, we did look into that. We are familiar with the federal project. We're familiar with the FHWA and the stewardship and oversight agreement with ADOT and FHWA. We're all familiar. But we don't have is a self-certification. So we look towards ADOT helps out. I'm looking at raw name, but it's actually LPA. But we don't federal projects.
Yeah, it was more the unit costs used to generate the estimate are much greater when it's federalized.
Oh,
I just wanted to ensure that was
Once we
taken
get it
into
federalized, guess what? Prices have gone up.
Yeah.
DBE, Davis Bacon, I mean, it's gone up quite a bit. And again, it's gone up too because we can't oversee the project. ADOT's going to do oversee the through Nigeria, obviously.
Thank you.
Yeah, we
Jose.
don't. This is not my preference, but that's the only one that's available. We're going to be going after whatever's available.
Yeah, I understand that.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I know that ADOT applies an administrative fee for HSIP projects, and they have that kind of really down to the dollar. was that applied in your costs, or is it just your cost was bumped up across the,
Yeah,
you do have that?
Yeah.
Great.
again, we know that as soon as it's federalized, it jump up. quite a
course,
bit
yeah,
For that same
yeah.
reason.
I know you know the routine.
A lot of
for sure.
recommendations that we need to comply with. Well, the project, you all know that once for $1 in the project, the whole project federalized. Costs a little bit more money.
So, Madam Chair, while I've got the floor, I'd like to make just a few points, if that's all right with you. So, I understand this isn't an action item. Traditionally, this committee has had more involvement in recommending what projects move forward with this federally driven program. And so hopefully we can get back to that at some point. We understand the need to deliver on RTA promises, and that should be ingrained and connected to the program, certainly. But a few things that kind of jumped out at us, me in particular, as I looked into this a little bit more deeply. Catherine has mentioned some of the issues with the lack of transparency with the process itself. As we looked at the guidance coming out of FHWA, we recognize that they call for adequate public involvement and transparency as the competitive process is being developed. We didn't really see that. And so I think it led to project applicants not really fully understanding what the qualifying and evaluation parameters of the call for project were. And so, as Robin said, it would really serve us much better if we understood how we can and should be competing for these programs, if it's laid out clearly in the call for projects. And it doesn't seem like it was laid out very clearly at that point. And so another one in there is that while it's been said that there's no prescriptive method coming out of the feds for the project selection process, we still do see language in the guidance that states that a competitive process must prioritize project location and impact in high need areas as defined by the state, such as low income, transit dependent, rural, and other areas. Adding 5 bonus points after the fact or in a 100-point score doesn't really feel like prioritizing that. And so I want to make sure that we as the members of PAG can feel very confident in this kind of program adhering to the federal requirements and the federal spirit of what the Transportation Alternatives Program is attempting to do. And then the last point I'll make is that we know that the Transportation Alternatives funding was essentially turned off for a couple years while we were in continuing resolution. And that funding was basically encumbered as traditional STBG and used for, non-bicycle pedestrian specific projects. That's anywhere in the range of $2.4 to $3.6 million that took place. And so to ask us to reduce our scope by close to 50%, we would hope there would be some consideration to looking at the funding that was held back for use in bicycle pedestrian projects and put into general project delivery use, and consider whether or not it would be advisable to fully fund all projects, being that it was put on ice or frozen or not administered for some time during the continuing resolution. So that's all I've got, but thank you for the opportunity.
Is there anybody else that has any discussion on this item online? Please just speak up. It's hard to see raised hands on the screen. If not, this was an information only item, so we will move on to item number 5, the PAG annual bicycle and pedestrian count, and David Mitchell.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, good morning. My name is David Mitchell, and I'm here to promote our annual bicycle and pedestrian count, which is going to be starting up next month. Just a quick review, it's a region-wide count. We do it annually. We have it on established bike routes. It's highly volunteer driven. Typically, we get anywhere from 50 to 70 volunteers depending on our recruitment efforts, and about a handful of sites that we count every year, what we call a core, and we've got upwards of 100 different locations or shifts, if you would, totaling 70 counts around the region that we capture throughout the region. Now we do collect counts for bicycles. We also do pedestrians, and then we do a little bit more to collect some of the characteristics of our bike riders. Here are some of our accomplishments since the start of the program back in 2008. We did continue to count during COVID, and the rest of my presentation will show you some of the findings that we have had from the recent counts. What we see in our findings is about 25% of our riders are female. This has been as high as 27% recently, and it has been slowly climbing over time. So it's an indication that perhaps our commuter ratio of male to female is improving. We have seen an increase in the use of helmets throughout the region. Right now, only a third of our riders still are not seen on the roads using a helmet. This is kind of a picture capturing the use of helmet usage over the last 5 years. If we were to go back a span of 10 years, we could see the inverse of the two graphs. We've done a complete flop in a 10-year period, where it used to be 2/3 of our riders were not wearing helmets. Now 2/3 are wearing helmets. That's a good thing for the region. That's important. And then we also observe different behaviors by cyclists. We have observed that 3% of the riders in our count ride against the car traffic. In some environments, this may pose a safety hazard. So the usage of this data may point out to intersections that might have safety improvements related to bikes riding into car traffic. And we also see such behavior on sidewalks. We see 6.5% of our riders are on the sidewalks. These two trends recently have slowly been increasing. We do monitor that. It is still a very low percentage. We see a high concentrated occurrence of these areas around campus. And then just from a quick analytical look, we also see them happening in areas that we would classify as underdeveloped or low-income neighborhoods. We're also tracking the usage of e-bikes and e-scooters on our network. This graph only shows 3 years. This is since the inception of the To-Go program, but we have been tracking it for more than 5 years. And those numbers have been very, very close to 0%. So what we've seen over a 3-year period is a steady increase, even with the dip that we've seen during COVID. We suspect that the dip in this data is more due to the shift in when riders are out on the network. We've seen that true with our general count data, and comparing it with the Pima County's loop data, through the COVID environment, some of the riders have not been using the network during our traditional rush hour periods per se, but rather shifting to times outside those zones. And some of the loop reports show the same types of usage increase. So that's kind of a summary of the type of data that we get from our report. Last year we counted at 46 different locations. I hope to get that number up, but generally we take the approach of counting ones that we have counted before, so historical locations, so we can do comparative analysis. But we also offer the opportunity to do baseline counts. So if you've got a pending improvement project coming, we can do a count to capture what's currently happening, and then later on we can do counts again to see how the investments have translated into bike and pedestrian activity. And so that's kind of a breakdown of how we do count locations. And we also look at places that have invested infrastructure for bike and ped, such as hawk signals, bike routes, multi-use paths, and intersections with our designated bike routes. We have a full report. We have data available. We have a website that we publish and is available to the public. Here's the link for it. I can share that through email if necessary, or it's in the notes with the slides. But this information is live. We have all the data from the past 5 years. I do work with our bike ped people often to deliver. this data as well as previous years, but it is there for your consumption. And with that, I'll close with the promotion of this year's count. The dates have been set for Monday, October 15th through November 3rd. That's a Thursday. It's a 3-week period. Volunteer recruitment is already underway. It includes participation with some U of A students. We do have a handful of jurisdictional staff that participate. Thank you very much for all that. It's important to note that any time and volunteers or participants in this is an in-kind match. We traditionally see about 300 hours of contribution. So this is it's a great opportunity not only to collect data, but also to improve some of that in kind. And with that, Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll open up at this time.
Any questions from the committee?
Okay.
Okay.
How does that work? Do you just have somebody standing out there and just count the number of bicycles? And how it work for vehicles? But for bicycles, I mean, how does that work? Is it, you have somebody out there from
Yeah, it's
5 p.m.?
we have 2 count periods. There's a morning session on weekdays at 7 to 9 a.m. Another one at 4 to 6 p.m. Those are in line with what we would call our peak hour or rush hour. So we're trying to capture the highest possible or expected highest possible bike volumes. That's why we also do it in October, which for our region is a very popular time for riding, not only for being in nice weather after a hot summer, but also because of El Tour de Tucson, the start of U of A, and the ridership patterns and the nature of our count being around there. So we do capture a lot of data during those times. But yeah, our volunteers will stand out there, or we recommend bringing a lawn chair if the site doesn't have accommodating seating, and they'll with a clipboard and a sheet, they'll tally the bikes that go by and collect the different characteristics that basically deliver the same data that I presented to you. Yeah, so the question. Thank you.
Follow up.
Mhm.
Are the counts just on the roadway, or are they in the multi-use path and the loop, or everything that's out there?
A majority of them are on the road network, so these would be intersections, but they would be on our designated bike routes. We don't have a lot that would be, say, a Canada Speedway caliber intersection. We don't build our networks to put bikes there, so we're not looking to and expecting to count the higher volumes there. What we are looking at, say, maybe instead mountain and speedway. So we're looking at a major bike corridor that cross traffics with another connecting corridor, maybe not around Speedway, but maybe a block north of it. So give you kind of the concept is that we're trying to capture it in areas where there's expected bicycle traffic, partially because we want to capture the true characteristics of our riders. We can only rely on American Survey and U.S. Census data so far, but if we can get a capture on the ground with our data, that's very valuable to get that perspective. And so yeah, we look at that. We also look at areas where there's investment in infrastructure, and those have typically been off of, for bicycle planning, has typically been off of the main arterials and such. There are some loop locations, quite a few handfuls. We have the loop touches several jurisdictions and brings users from the county's network into the cities of Tucson, into Marana's, Oro Valley. And then there's even networks connecting Sahuarita now. And we have the intent to find some spots on the reservations. Jason and Patricia, I'll be reaching out to you this afternoon to get some feedback from you on those. But generally, we look at places where we expect to be bikes, and we put them in places where our volunteers will be safe and not in danger from high speed moving vehicles.
I have a couple of questions. How is the collection of gender data relevant for planning purposes?
It in some ways it allows us to get a perspective of the safety of our roads or the comfort level of our roads. In general, bicycle user classification has been like the fearless down to the very afraid. And traditional bike behavior has been dominated by males, and not only recreational use, but in areas where there's not commuting infrastructure, those environments tend to show higher male-dominated ridership. Now, areas where there's infrastructure put in that promote all development, transit, pedestrian, and bicycle modes. For all that, such follows higher commuter usage of bicyclists, and that usually translates to higher female ridership and youth ridership in those areas, because it reduces the amount of fear presented to the riders. And so that could be used as a gauge for our region. As I mentioned, it's a trend that is increasing. So we are seeing an increase in females. Now, this is also during our count period. It's not, we can make that assumption that it may apply to the rest of the time of travel as well. But it's just an indicator. It's something that we provide because we can. There is some built-in error because we count on our volunteers to make a best guess on the type of rider. Generally, body size or bike style and colors of accessories can give an indication, but as we all know, with the helmet on and hairstyles being universal and whatnot, it can be hard to tell. But we get pretty consistent results over time. Comparatively, nationwide, the general numbers 25-26%. So we're about right there with national averages.
Couple follow-ups. So have you ever stopped the bicyclists to ask them if they're commuting or if they're riding recreationally? That might be a better indicator.
The methodology of this does not have volunteers interact with the riders. They're just there to observe. It's to help keep them out of harm's way, but also some count locations have a lot of volume. And for example, if a group of training riders out training go by, you could be counting 20 to 25 cyclists at one point. In addition, we respect the desire of the commuter, the bicyclist, to be able to complete his commute. And it's just not part of the methodology. We don't use the data or make assumptions based on it. We just present that's what the findings of it.
I think there could be strategies to do that. I am personally interested in commuter behavior for my work. So if there could be a more accurate way to assess that, I'm sure there are strategies. My other question is, how is this information tied to safety? We have a considerable problem with bicycle deaths and accidents, bicyclists being hit by cars in this region. And so if you're not counting in areas that you wouldn't suspect bicyclists, you might be missing information about people that are bicycling in areas that are dangerous. So what kind of connections are made between safety and the bike count data?
None that we make directly, but it is made available should someone want to use it. And the value of it is our data it is tied to, it can be used for GIS. You can plug it into a map and see and overlay it as a layer with other data points. There are other bicycle counts in the region. We do collect turn movement counts and segment counts where bicycle usage is collected. Our bicycle data, our count data is more valuable in the sense of validating a model than it would be to tell the true volumes of a network. While our count does provide the numbers, there's more richness and more value in the data that we collect from the characteristics, because that's data that we would not be able to provide elsewhere. But to your point, our data can be used for safety. We have it available at your request. If you have a project where you are considering a safety funding and you want to see the bike area, we can give it to you not only at the point, but also by any radius. So if you've want to look for one mile or a quarter mile search around a project zone, we could certainly provide you bike count data for that area. And there's also time to submit locations for this year's count. If you have something in mind, please send it my way. And if it's a high priority for you, it's a high priority for me. And we will make sure that gets counted in the cycle.
Have you guys considered or thought about how we can incorporate some of the data that's collected by the intersection cameras now? I know MyoVision that we've installed at all the county signalized intersections has the fisheye, so you see all the users that are in that location. I don't know.
Yes, PAG considers all types of count data. For this program, it's just a data collection program, and we kind of leave it at that. It is basically the methodology has been in place as is since 2008. And it is a PAG program. If it's something that could be enriched or modified in any way, we could always bring that to the table as future agenda item.
Okay.
Mhm.
Excuse me,
Hi,
this
Dave.
is
Paul Casertano
excuse me,
here.
this is
Sure.
Jason.
Oh, go ahead,
Hello?
Jason. Sorry.
Yeah, Jason.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to touch base with Dave real quick. Do you need a location for future survey spot on the reservation? Is that what you were asking for?
Yes, I was going to reach out to you by email. If you have one in
Okay.
mind, you can. So we could keep that offline if you want. But yeah, I'll be if you have a handful of locations that you have interest in, I would love to be able to provide you that data. Traditionally, we've struggled with collecting data in the outer regions. What I would say, Oro Valley, Marana have slowly come along, but we rely on their staff to collect a lot of the locations. Our volunteers like to stay around central Tucson and East Tucson. So we have trouble capturing from the reservations from Sour Reach up specifically, and I'm making more efforts to try and capture those in this year's count. Also, Paul, I know we're still waiting from yours and Jonathan's list, but respectful to some of the rural areas, if you have some interest in those as well, those are certainly good candidates for that. We do have resources to count locations outside of the volunteers, myself included. I do counts usually 10 to 15 per season, and have a handful of jurisdictional staffs and community partners that are at the ready to count more than one location if needed. So Jason, is okay if I reach out to you for email? We can continue this. Do you have any other questions?
Please.
Okay, and
Yeah,
Patricia, the same goes for you. So please consider those. Get in touch with your staffs, and some agencies get in touch with their traffic controls or parks and rec. Those are some considerations as well. Your activity zones or areas maybe where you've had a lot of incidents of crashes. Those would be areas I would be more than happy to work with you on, and anything of any other category too.
Yeah,
So.
and this is Patricia. I'll be available to discuss this a little bit more.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Patricia. Hi.
Anyone else online? Otherwise, Paul, I think you were.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the update. I know we've spoken in the past about making sure that the program not only is sustained, but can grow in the right ways. And so thanks for your efforts to reach out individually to jurisdictions and get their input on where appropriate count locations might be. I'd like to encourage PAG to get back to having that discussion as a whole group. I think there's value in jurisdictional exchange in terms of making sure that everybody, we see it in the questions we get from Jose and others, understand the program and what the count does, what the data is used for, how it might connect to other data and be combined with other data to do deeper analyses. And two, make sure that the count locations make sense and the core locations are adjusted in the ways that the practitioners think are most appropriate. I think that's a discussion that's best had in like a bicycle pedestrian subcommittee or task force or whatever is currently on the books for PAG. We can bring staff to have that discussion, and I don't think there's any deep concerns about open meeting laws, given that there's probably not going to be any actions at that type of task force anyway. It would just be recommendations to modify the program. So I think those are two things that could happen. And then just back to Natalie's question about safety, we thought about that when I was back on the PAG side quite a bit. And back in 2016, we did look at the safety performance of different bicycle facility types. And the bicycle pedestrian count program allowed us to get to crash per mile type of evaluation. So not a gigantic surprise, but the facilities that did not mix with traffic were far superior in terms of their safety performance, right? But we had the numbers in order to be able to point to that, and the program helped us do that. So I think there are plenty of ways that we can look at using this data more effectively to combine it with crash data and do deeper analyses. We talked about bringing in not only MyoVision, but hawk activations throughout the community will give us a sense of where pedestrian and bicycle activity is happening that would support the volunteer count program. So thanks for all you do, and we're delighted that the program continues. Part of the very value of the program is its longevity. And so we want to make sure that it continues to be valuable. And one way to do that is to pull the jurisdictions in to have a discussion about what adjustments might be appropriate to keep the program healthy and connect it to other data and evaluation techniques. So thanks.
Madam Chair, all this is information online, right? Dave?
The
Yeah,
data is available online, and our old website had our old reports. I'm not sure how those are arranged on the new one. I don't believe some of the old reports. They're basically a summary of the charts and stuff. But the website has graphs and charts from the last 3 years of data collection, so you can navigate there and play with it.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Madam Chair, if I can add. I also just want to reiterate something that Mr. Mitchell said kind of briefly, but I really want to make the point to this committee is how valuable you are in helping us recruit volunteers for this program. So yes, the in-kind is important, but you all have a lot of staff and your agencies are pretty big. And if you can work with them to help get some people out on the street, we do appreciate that.
Are these counts taken on the weekends or just during the week?
Yes, we do perform we do perform a morning count on weekends. That's a 3-hour shift. I've been told if you need to drink a lot of fluid and have a weak bladder, that's not a good shift for you.
Thank you, Dave.
But otherwise, it's you can't beat October weather in Arizona and Tucson specifically. So you'll find if you're out on the loop, you may find me one morning in a lawn chair and a clipboard and a smile. So yeah, so please consider for yourselves or sharing with your staffs and your contacts. Certainly, even anyone over 16 who needs some volunteer experience or resume writing, and we can work with you there too. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the update. Let's move on to the next item if we're ready. So item number 6, regional transportation revenues. David Zinda.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. You'll note that we are now well into a new fiscal year, so a lot of these numbers have reset, and I have made some minor modifications, rather additions to the region-wide HERF revenues report. Concerning the other revenues, you'll note that in the memo, federal obligation authority is unknown until next month when the new federal fiscal year will begin, and we have a new ledger for which to provide you information. Thanks to the RTA Deputy Director, we also have some RTA revenue numbers there. Those are not ones that I routinely work with, so I can't probably answer too tricky questions about those. Turning to the HERF revenues report, now we can reference them by table. So table 1, HERF distributions in the PAG region. This includes 2.6, 12.6, and also your direct HERF that you get to your own departments. We're looking at 14 million to kick the year off in August, compared to fiscal year 2021 on one data point, mind you, but a little bit under, and that's largely coming from the direct HERF portion and not HERF 12.6 or 2.6, but still well above the 5-year average. Table 2, we are considering only HERF 12.6. Once again, we have that one data point for July. Sorry, I think I said August earlier. We don't have August data quite yet, but we'll update you with that next time around. So in July, 2.6 million and change. You'll notice now we have a fiscal year 2023 projection. They are the same every month. That comes from the official ADOT projection that was issued last year, simply divided by 12. That number is going to change in the next month or two once ADOT updates their forecasting process for the Highway User Revenue Fund. Compared to fiscal year 23, we're seeing about an 11% year-over-year number there, and even higher compared to what we had received in July of last year. Going to table 3, we see the same, but with her 2.6 and a very similar story there, using the same forecasting methodology put out by ADOT. Table 4 specifically shows HERF 12.6 balances on our own ag ledger. You can see those since July 2021 going up until July 2022. And lastly, we have, figure 1 also relating to the region-wide HERF revenues, very similar to table 1. Table 5, there were some questions on table 5 and the corresponding graphic on figure 2 in our last meeting as to why there was such a large drop. I think it must have been around April. The issue was that Costco had not reported all the gallons of gas that they sell. And if you're like me, I only go to Costco, and it looks like a lot of people in Tucson do. So there was about 3.5 million gallons missing from that report. That has since been corrected. Although we do see a little bit of a dip, at least in July of this fiscal year. We'll continue to watch that and make sure it tracks that 13% number very closely. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, Madam Chair, and members of the committee.
Thank you, David, and thanks for checking on that gas collections. That's a big change. I have a quick question. The summary table that you have on the agenda item where it shows fiscal year 23 projected revenues for 12.6, we show 22 million, but on table 2, when it shows fiscal year 23 projected, we're up at 28.5 million. So what's the 6.5 million difference? And
yes, that's an
where are we
excellent
programming that?
Yes, excellent question, Madam Chair. So in this initial memo part, we wanted to reflect the kind of official HAG region number, which was found in the tip, which was made before we started using the official ADOT numbers. On this next tip cycle, as we've talked about, we'll be using those official ADOT numbers. So in the future, this report, those numbers will not be any different, but for now, because they are different methodologies, this one shows 22 million, even though we know that that's not probably representative of what we'll actually get given the better ADOT values this year. We just wanted to be consistent with what was officially adopted.
And we're waiting for those official adoptions till we start talking tip development and what that total amount of money that could potentially go to fill the RTA cost to complete hole. I mean, have we accounted for this $6.5 million, which I'm sure is carried over year after year in that cost to complete exercise, or is this new money?
Yes, thank you for the question. ADOT should have new revenue estimates out by mid-October. So probably by November TPC, which will be after the RTA board meeting, we'll be in a better position to discuss those and how these different amounts of money are used or are still on the table or are committed. And we can have that conversation, I think, at that point. Mr. Brown, do you have anything else?
Thank you, David. Madam Chair, members of the committee. The cost to complete component of your question, I think, needs to be answered. RTA staff was prepared for that. So part of this agenda that we have to talk about that at a future meeting.
Well, Mr. DeGrood is on the phone. Jim, can you, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward question, and I think it pertains to this item in terms of the RTA revenue and the HERF revenue to understand whether that money is being accounted for in the overall analysis of our program.
The answer is yes, and we have two different forecasts that we compare to. One is the baseline forecast. The baseline forecast reflects the tip amount that you spoke to. The optimistic forecast includes an estimate, and it is just that, an estimate of what we might see from 12.6 using a more aggressive set of numbers. But at this point in time, those have not been validated, so we're not identifying them as baseline.
Thank you. Yes, Robin.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I have a question that you probably can't answer at this point, but I would be interested in how it tracks. And that is going back to the cost to complete compared to the increased revenues, and how do those tally? Because I know that inflation on some, especially construction items, has been quite high. And it looks like our revenues are coming in high, but I'd be interested to know which is inflating faster.
Hopefully the revenue.
I know. So again, it's not a question I don't think you can answer now. It's kind of early in the year, but I would love to track that information.
That's a great idea. If you have a suggestion of what that charting might look like from a graphical perspective, I'm sure that would be helpful in terms of how we would communicate that. But it is definitely something we're all tracking very closely as every bid opens.
And Madam Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, but this connects directly to the fiscal analysis that you and the PC team did before I came over that said, hey, look at the new forecast coming out of ADOT, and it appears that there's additional PERF and even SDBG coming out of the federal program that are not in the current TIP numbers. And so that was that 6 million a year, which ended up being a fairly substantial little, bit of revenue to be put toward the cost to complete. I haven't seen that shift necessarily happen in the old September cost to complete gap and the adjustment of that gap. I would have expected to see that happen where the gap would be moved down for the revenue calculation and then moved up for the pricing and the cost increases that we're seeing. All I've seen is that the gap has moved up for the pricing. So I guess I'd love to see more detail about how it has been incorporated, as Jim has stated, because I haven't necessarily seen the adjustments to the cost to complete that I would expect to see coming out of the fiscal analysis that you did, if those funds are truly being brought to the picture.
Yeah, and I think, your comments, Robin's comments, my comments, it's all tying to, these financial reports are really helpful for us to kind of get an idea of where we're going as a region. Are we staying steady? Are we going down? Are we going up? And that's important information as we move into the TIP development cycle. So as much transparency on these numbers and how they're being applied to a whole bunch of different planning studies that are going on concurrently, I think will just yield better results for reports we need to review and different items we're going to review as a committee in future meetings. Are there any other questions on this item?
Madam Chair, and just a comment, it appears that there's quite a bit of fund balance in 12.6, almost $47 million. Are the projects not moving along? Because apparently these funds are tied to RTA projects. So I guess my concern is, are the projects not moving? Why? That's like $47 million balance. That's a lot of money.
That caught my eye as well. And I know there was a time 5-6 years ago that every time we would review that and say, okay, we need to start moving that forward. How much of that balance, I guess, to just add to your question, I'm not sure who from staff can answer it. How much of that increase in the balance is due to the fact that we have far more revenues coming in than we programmed in the TIP, and we didn't take an action as a committee to assign those to projects in a timely fashion? And then, what is the status of the projects that are tying up that funding?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I don't know that I have that answer for you. I think the intent of at least one of the TIP subcommittee meetings we'd like to have the TIP development process is to actually review all the projects in the current statuses. And so this is a revenues report. We did make this adjustment. This is added back in by request in terms of like it's project specific and how much is being drawn down. That's a different conversation. We're just not prepared to answer at this time, but we'd like to have project on project conversations at those meetings.
Okay. Great. Are there other questions, Jose? Did that answer your question well enough? We'll talk at a future meeting.
This is not the appropriate place to talk about it. Curious why some projects aren't moving forward.
Or if the funding's even assigned to a project. It's not tied to a project, it's just going to sit there. Are there any other items on this one? Okay, we'll move forward to item 7, the Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan update.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the committee, not too much new this month to give you an update on from last month. Right now, we are working on developing a schedule update to bring to the committees. So that's forthcoming. Probably we'll see something definitely by the end of the year. I can't promise next month or November, but you'll see one coming through soon. We anticipate the project list coming through from the RTA next process. So that's really a big key piece of what we're going to be including in the RMAP. So as that process develops, of course, we're going to incorporate and fold that information in. Before finalizing the project list, we will need to solidify that fiscally constrained bottom line number. So that's a goal for the end of this year, is to bring forward the methodology again that Mr. Zinda had presented on a few months back. He did state and local, federal and state contributions, and we'll be bringing local contributions for review, and then ultimately for this committee to sort of bless that methodology as we move forward. That will not be a final approval in any means on the finance plan. It really is just for us to solidify how we're developing that number and making sure that everybody agrees on the methodology. As we get collections information and we have some to-date numbers that we can add into that financial plan, we'll continue to do so up until closer to the adoption date of the RMAP. I like to just assure people of that, because it is still about 2 years out, or a year and a half, 2 years out. So we don't want anyone to have the impression that we're going to just stop right now, but we'll be able to continue to work on that. So we'll be bringing the finance plan back probably in November, and then for a final approval, either at that November meeting if we're comfortable making that decision, or we can also wait until December. There's really no rush on that. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to say in regards to the finance plan, or say?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the meeting jet. Just thanks to all the jurisdictions who have reached out and helped me in developing some of these local estimates. I appreciate your assistance, and I think it'll make for a very good financial plan that's much more faithful to what you would expect to put forward for projects. Thank you.
Additionally, Josh and the modeling team are continuing to work through the development of the model. Most importantly, we're in anticipation of the population projections in December. So we had a PopTech meeting last month, and we're very grateful for the participation of all the agencies that were present. And we anticipate more meetings as those population projections come forward. And we're always at the mercy of the state on that. And we're anticipating December, which is our typical delivery date. And it's one of those, it's like Christmas present, right? Like, here comes December, are we getting our numbers? So Josh isn't on the call, but if there's anything else to add to that, he'll be available for the next meeting. We'll have a more detailed update in the forthcoming months. And we'll also probably have an outline later on in the year on how we're going to tackle performance measures and review that element of the plan. That's all I have today.
Jeanette, are there any questions from the committee?
Sure.
Yes. Okay.
Well, what is the ultimate date to have the RMAP approved? What are we looking at?
We're looking at spring of 24.
For the 24th.
Mhm. Yeah.
With the revenue forecast that's going to come out, I would just request if we're going to be having a full conversation about it in November, as much of the information that you can send out prior to that. I'm anticipating that the slides will be dense with numbers and, percent increases. And that's going to be really hard for us to have a valuable conversation in this room if we haven't reviewed it beforehand. So as much of that data beforehand, I'd appreciate.
Chair, members of the committee, absolutely. And like I said, we don't have to bring it for an action item necessarily in November. We can bring it for discussion and then action item at a later time. So we'll make sure that everybody is comfortable with that before we take action.
Thank you. If there's no other questions from the committee, we'll move on. Item 8, the ADOT 2022-2025 performance target, and it's Dave Mitchell again.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for having me back so soon. It's always a pleasure. I'm changing hats now, taking off my bike helmet and putting on my performance measures hat. PAG, as an MPO, we participate in a federal program that was derived from the FAST Act. It's a series of performance measures. They're arranged in 3 different series. One of them being safety. The safety ones I'm not covering today. The ones I'm covering today are everything that are not safety. You can get some more information about how the reporting is done on these performance measures in the program. PAG's participation is very limited in it, and in that we just kind of support ADOT's target and projection and reporting processes. And then you can see where the FHWA, where they put out the data, so you can see the nationwide performance, and then you can also see how ADOT presents it and see statewide performance for all of the performance measures data. Now we're entering a second reporting period. They're grouped into 4-year periods. We just ended the first 4-year period and starting the second one. Because of that, ADOT has had to establish new performance projections for the measures within all the series. Again, these are for the types of data that we're looking at, and projections are bridge condition. This is a program where they're looking at mid-performance projections as well as ones for 4 years out. They are seeing and projecting to have a general decline in the quality of some of, I'm sorry, this for bridges, they are seeing a general slight increase in bridge performance conditions and reducing the number of poor bridges. We're not seeing the same for pavement statewide. We're seeing condition of interstates and NHS pavements are slightly deteriorating at a faster pace than we can repair them. They're expecting poor conditions to continually rise, and the amount of good condition to not be able to keep up with the same pace. So both of these, all series of these projections are projected to be getting worse. System reliability, this is related to volumes, congestion, and capacity. Generally, they're seeing a slight decrease in system reliability. The types of measures show that more vehicles are coming on the road. This is true with population and vehicle mile counts, and they're seeing a slight decrease in desired performance in these categories, which include freight and whatnot. Now, it's important to note, if I didn't make clear, that these types of performance measures are based on the NHS, that's the National Highway System, which includes the interstates and then some of the surface arterial streets and highways through our region. Those that are not on NHS, those would be our air quality and our congestion measures, also known as CMAQ. There's a series of emissions that the program is reducing over time in terms of kilograms per day. These ones are continually to increase over time by nature of the CMAQ program. So these projections are more favorable than previous in those terms. There are some measures here that also measures the non-single occupancy vehicle travel. That's in terms of carpool, and also peak hour excessive delay. So this is where you're sitting at extreme traffic and not moving. So those types of measures are also collected to gauge congestion and air quality performance on a national and a statewide trend. So with that note, it's important to note that all these projections are for statewide application and may not necessarily be the true measure for the PAG region. But we as a agency and as MPO, the guidance from FHWA and the state level is to participate and there's been a letter of request put to PAG for support of these projections, and our deadline to do so is next year on February 27th. That's all I have to present on my slides, but I'm willing to open up for discussion and questions at this time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Paul?
Dave, I'm wondering if you can maybe give a little bit of clarity on how the statewide measures and the federally required performance measures are used as a touch point when you're considering what performance targets to establish as part of the PAG region long range RMAP plan. I know from hands-on personal experience that there is a difference because the statewide measures are looking at statewide and they're looking at a limited portion of the transportation network and things like that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how those might be used as you're considering refreshing the performance measures and particularly the targets for the upcoming RMAP, and how you see that process going in terms of discussion with the jurisdictions and practitioners on that target doesn't look quite right, let's adjust it. How are you envisioning that process to lay out as you take these statewide PMs and apply them to determining what's appropriate for this region beyond just the national highway system?
Great. Hi, Paul. Thank you for the question. And it's good to hear your voice again, and I could see you on my little screen. So welcome to our office again. The program originally started, our performance measure program that we see now in RMAP was engineered and designed kind of at the same time as the federal program was being rolled out. So you'll see a lot of similarities in terms of the goal areas. So RMAP has 7 goal areas that are very closely related to the 7 goal areas that MAP 21 established. And for that, the way that panned out for PAG was we were able to, we get high marks from based up when we do our reviews of any sorts. There are RTA audits, or when we do the federal certifications, we always shine with our performance-based program, for many reasons, but one, because we model it after the Fed program to begin with. So we would probably continue to look at what the Fed's doing to kind of structure ours as we move forward. That being said, the measures aren't always the true story of our region. For example, the pavement and the bridge conditions speak only to the interstates and then the NHS, which are very small percentages of our road network, less than 10%. And so to rely on those as a way to gauge the performance of our region, it doesn't really paint the whole picture. And that's why in RMAP, we decided to use all the federal aid network as our analysis for pavement condition. Our bridges perform very well in the region, but only a small percentage of them fall on the NHS, which the performance measures package is dealing with. Safety deals with all public roads, so those measures translate exactly. However, there's only 5 safety measures in the federal program. We have, I think, 13 that we look at. So we're looking at rates, we're looking at different modes, we're looking at fatalities and serious injuries. And all those are up for review again, whether we want to, pare it down to have a special focus or to bring in new considerations. And to that point, the federal programs are very good at providing data for consideration. They're going through a lot of work to verify that it's good, reliable data that it can be used to consistently to measure the performance of our networks. And so there's becoming more and more opportunity to improve the types of performance measures that we can use to evaluate our roadways. It's all about the metrics that are used to develop those measures. Each metric is its own different data point. There's third-party data that's coming available through the use of cell phone usage. That's providing a lot of travel time and trip data that's very valuable. There's different types of phone apps that track pedestrian and bicycle movements, so there's opportunities there. PAG is exploring all different options. Josh isn't on the call, but he's being called out again. He and his staff are constantly looking and evaluating those. I get brought into it occasionally to see if there's any use for performance measures, consideration, and all those would be at our disposal for when we do go to the new RMAP to develop the performance measures packet. We have over 50 of them right now. Half of them are measures that we get data from observed and actual data points, but the other half are from our model output. So there's also consideration that should be done to what type of data should we use? Should we use a mix of it? Should we kind of move away from model data as a way to measuring actual performance? There's plenty of discussion that could be had, and I will be there at the table with Jeanette and Josh and other staff and you guys when it's time to explore that.
Well, I'd like to encourage you to, pull us into that conversation as early as possible. From a local agency perspective, each of us are considering the right measures to evaluate the health of our network, right? And so if we're doing that in a network ownership perspective, I think it would be tremendously valuable for us to have that regional look as well, so that we can see how the RMAP performance measures, and particularly the targets, need to be shifted, adjusted, updated. We're going to be struggling with how the heck do we wrap our heads around delivery of Justice 40 and those types of things. So we're going to be looking at that from an agency perspective, and I think you're going to have to be looking at a lot of those things from a regional perspective. The more heads we can get together to go through that process, I think it would be a benefit to all of us, so that we're not reinventing pieces at a local level. So thanks for that, Dave.
Other questions, comments from the committee?
I'll jump in.
Josh joins. You didn't see that name.
If you keep
Mentioning it.
right, like here.
Spoke to him.
I emerged in a different room, but I come late here. So Dave, thanks, and sorry I wasn't on the Zoom earlier, and I was trying to make sure tomorrow's going to go smoothly. Yeah, we're looking for the opportunity in the RMAP to kind of revisit the content, everything that Dave just said. So this tentatively, we're looking at the spring, beginning of the year, to revisit those. Everybody has a lot on their plates with the packed RMAP to RTA next, so we're trying to get the pacing right, and we're tentatively have beginning of the year in spring targeted for the PM discussion. Also acknowledging or recognizing that we're working through a similar exercise with CAC right now. So that's an effort that we could potentially lean on and glean from their perspective too. So if anybody has any questions, be happy to address them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks.
I have a question. I know this doesn't include the safety stuff, but every time we talk safety, we get into this challenge of definitions and words we're using. So safety, we have a target that is really like a projection. It's not a goal. So for this item, are we talking projections like we think this is what we're going to hit versus goal, we'd like to be in this place?
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. It is important to clarify that, because it does provide a better understanding of how this data is used. It is, excuse me, one second. Now it is the safety stuff is more of, how should I phrase it? The safety stuff has more relevance to our network because it really is all public roadways, whereas the other two categories, there's some limited scope of what the roads cover. Now it's the projections and the targets. Yeah, the terminology of those are synonymous. The feds use the words target, but the projections that PAG uses the term projections because they are using real data trends to establish a forecast. They are not using the data to aspire where they want to be. So to answer your question, no, these are not aspirational targets or projections. These are where the state expects to be at their mid-performance and end of the performance period within 2 and 4 year cycles. So they are statewide measures. We are able to also look at the data to see what the PAG values are. But these are basically projections for statewide. The state ADOT has worked with PAG on collecting the data, uses the same data sets as we would use to calculate the measures for our region. But these are, again, statewide. They include the PAG region, but also all the other regions throughout the state. So it's not the full story of the regions, basically what I'm trying to get at. And so for that purpose, PAG has has took the stance of basically supporting ADOT's performance projections, and the regional council adopted in perpetuity to support the ones for these series of measures. The safety ones we look at annually. We tend to be more proactive and sensitive to the use of targets in that presentation because we are dealing with people's lives in that category, and we don't want to give the impression that certainly we don't want to aspire for there to be ever more fatalities or any fatalities or injuries on our network. But the FAST Act program is not measuring where we would like to be or the goals of the nation, but where the nation is headed based on actual data sets and the trend analysis. ADOT stance for their target setting is to be conservative. They look at existing trend data and apply a conservative forecast for the 2 and 4 year periods. They also had looked at the COVID data and saw a lot of variance. It was very volatile. So they decided not to use trends of the COVID 2 to 3 year timeframe to establish this series of projections. Rather, they used the 2017 to 2019 type of timeframe to establish the trends and use that rate of change and applied it to present current year data sets. So it's it's basically a statewide look at where we're going to stand compared to other states. MPOs have very little relevance in the reporting. The websites that I shared with you earlier have the dashboards, and you'll see that nationwide there's no mention of counties or MPOs or anything lower than the state level.
Thank you, Dave. So if we as a group wanted to discuss actual aspirational goals, is that appropriate to tie into the RMAP development as we move forward? To me, that seems like where we take performance measure, data as it exists, projection of where we're going if we don't change anything, and contemplate what we want for this region and where we want to invest in improvements. And so I would hope that conversation is going to be a large part of the RMAP development process and happen as a regional group rather than as a staff recommendation of what this region wants.
Madam Chair, thank you for bringing that issue up. That was in essence the nature of my question. How are we going to take these forecast projections and then go to aspirational target setting as part of our long range plan? And so I think there's value to the forecast projections at the state level, but they are not going to replace the aspirational targets that we all want to see in the long range plan. So that I didn't really frame the question that way, but you're absolutely right. There is a difference between those two, quote unquote targets. The required set is projections of where you expect performance to be in this period. The RMAP set is your aspirational target of we want to be there by these time points in the long range plan. So that's an important conversation that I think we want to have both internally and with the PAG group, so that we can all come to terms on where we should be on all that. So thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, Madam Chair, if I may have a response to that, Paul, thank you for that. I will say there will be some limitations in that the reporting period is only 2 to 4 years out, whereas our RMAP will be a forecast of over 25 years, where we might find some value with the FAST Act programs, perhaps applying it to the programming of packages in our projects in our TIP. But staff is at full support in using whatever resources we have, including the federal program and data sets that come about it, and even using the trend analysis and perhaps prioritization of projects could be used. There are resources available to make those available at your request.
Thank you, Dave, for that clarification. It was important. Jose.
I just comment. I agree with Paul on aspirational goals, as long as they're within reason.
Yeah,
Totally want to put a goal. Yeah, we want to zero death. We all want that. The reality is that we have. So I agree with it.
You got to believe, Jose. You got to believe.
Within reason and attainable.
Yeah, they need to be realistic for sure, and they need to be time bound. We all recognize that. But I think we need to develop consensus there, and then we need to continue to track to target. I think PAG has done a nice job to be able to report and say how we're trending on these 50 measures that Dave mentioned. That's an important thing for all of us to keep in perspective as we're looking at renewing the long range plan and we're looking at programming money in the tip and those types of things. We should be checking in with where are we underperforming and what can we do to improve that.
Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Thank you, Dave, for the conversation. Good information.
Thank you.
Data
I'll see you
is
next month.
really
Let's see.
helpful. Yeah. We'll move on then to future agenda items. Are there any items that folks would like to request for a future meeting? I would say, I think, you know, we need to start to have that conversation about the aspirational goals. It's going to be more than a one meeting kind of event, I think. So we might as well start getting that calendared sooner rather than waiting till the last minute. Anything else? If you're online and you have an item, just shout it out, please. If
Perhaps as part of that RMAP update at the right time, if we can bring in the population projection conversation over from PopTech to TPC. I know that maybe there's not as much cross talk or, you know, interaction with our population folks within the jurisdictions. It'd be helpful to have that overview brought to TPC so that we have a sense of what that's beginning to look like at the right time.
that's a good idea. If there's nothing else, we can move forward to adjournment. I think we can just adjourn. I don't think we need action on it. Thank you, everyone.